This story begins like a scene from an American action movie, yet it remains unclear who would emerge as the perpetrator and who became a victim of circumstances. The only thing that can be stated with certainty is that not all participants in these events were destined to remain alive. In 2003, Kaylin Gillis was born in the small settlement of Schuylerville in New York State. Her parents chose a spacious home in a quiet neighborhood where about 1,000 residents lived. They all led measured, predictable lives in this peaceful corner of America. Kaylin's childhood and youth passed among picturesque landscapes. After graduating from the local high school, she dreamed of continuing her education in college. She was drawn to the prospect of dedicating herself to studying marine life or veterinary medicine. The girl felt a special affinity for animals. At the same time, she was known for her genuine compassion for people in need and was always ready to extend a helping hand. When Kaylin turned 20 in 2023, she submitted an application to study marine biology at an educational institution in Florida and was awaiting the results. Meanwhile, the girl was earning money, striving to achieve financial independence from her family. Besides work, she maintained a romantic relationship with a young man named Blake Walsh and regularly gathered with friends. During her school years, Kaylin enjoyed considerable popularity among her peers, and she managed to establish friendly relationships with all her acquaintances. Saturday, April 15, 2023, began as an ordinary weekend. Kaylin woke up and, having no work obligations, spent the morning hours at home without rushing. After noon, preparations began for a gathering planned for late evening. Together with Blake and other friends, they had received an invitation to a celebration that was to take place in a neighboring town. Around 9 in the evening, the girl called her boyfriend. He drove up to her home in a Ford Explorer. Ahead of them lay the road to the town of Hebron. Kaylin took the seat next to the driver, and they headed to the supermarket within their town, where they had arranged to meet other participants of the evening trip. Another vehicle with a couple joined their small procession. A young man on a motorcycle also joined the group, who immediately warned about technical problems with his vehicle. The engine could stall when stopped. The bike owner hoped to reach their destination without incident and planned to take it to mechanics at the beginning of the work week. The small convoy of 2 cars and a motorcycle set off toward Hebron, unaware of the tragic ending of this journey. Arriving in Hebron late at night, the group encountered problems with cell phone coverage. Previous directions included a description of a dirt road for turning, but in the darkness, all such roads looked the same. The situation was complicated by the lack of signal for GPS navigation. The phone stopped functioning several miles before the necessary exit. They had to rely exclusively on their friends' verbal explanations. The search for the right building was based on the description provided earlier. The young people expected that the venue would be noticeable. But the area turned out to be sparsely populated, and long driveways stretched to each property. All buildings looked similar, and none stood out with special features. After turning onto another dirt road, the friends continued on, hoping they had made the right choice. After traveling approximately 3 kilometers, they finally saw a large building, but no lights were on in the windows. It would have been logical to expect a noisy place with signs of celebration, but instead there was complete silence. At a distance of several dozen meters from the building, Kaylin rolled down the window and addressed her friends in the neighboring car, which was moving alongside Blake's vehicle. She expressed the assumption that they had taken the wrong route. To turn around, they needed to drive right up to the house where there was space to maneuver. Finally convinced of the absence of lighting and any signs of festivities, the group decided to turn back and check another option. The motorcycle owner avoided stopping due to the risk of stalling. He revved the engine several times, causing it to emit a loud roar. It was at this moment that lights came on in the building. Blake's car was second in line. The front car had managed to complete its turn, and Blake had paused, giving way to his friends. Kaylin looked back and noticed that after the lights appeared, a man ran out onto the porch. He was holding a firearm. First came a shot into the air, and then immediately a second one. Fear forced the young people to immediately leave the dangerous place. Kaylin's boyfriend sharply pressed the accelerator pedal. After driving 100 meters, Blake noticed out of the corner of his eye that his companion was breathing heavily and remaining silent, although the situation should have caused her no less anxiety. She didn't respond to his question about how she was feeling. Turning on the interior light and looking at the girl, he saw blood. Shock and horror overwhelmed Blake so much that he passed the car ahead on the shoulder. In a matter of minutes, he covered several kilometers, understanding the critical nature of the situation. He later recalled that under the influence of adrenaline, time seemed to compress to a few seconds. Throughout the journey, the young man tried to call emergency services, but the lack of coverage made connection impossible. Only when the signal was restored did Blake Walsh immediately dial 911. At 9:45 p.m., the duty operator received a call from a distraught young man. His voice trembled with fear. He reported that his 20-year-old girlfriend Kaylin Gillis was seriously injured. According to him, a shot from an unknown person on the porch had hit the girl in the neck. She was showing no response. The operator provided step-by-step instructions for providing emergency aid. Blake diligently followed the instructions while waiting for rescuers to arrive. The situation looked extremely grave. Police representatives were the first to arrive on scene. They saw a group of young people, a girl showing no signs of life, and Blake covered in blood. Medics were also rushing to the indicated location. Law enforcement officers confirmed the absence of vital signs in Kaylin. Her boyfriend, trembling and sobbing, begged them to save his beloved. Unfortunately, help arrived too late. The girl could not be brought back to life. The cause of Kaylin's death was a gunshot wound to the neck with massive blood loss. Medical workers recorded the time of death. Officers immediately examined the vehicles and personal belongings of the young people. Initially, a theory emerged about the possibility of a shot by one of those present. Blake's SUV had no damage. Despite the story about an armed man, the young man insisted that the window on Kaylin's side was open. No weapons were found on any of those present. However, there was a possibility of concealment, so the entire group was taken to the station to clarify the circumstances of the tragedy. The body of the deceased was sent for pathological examination. The expert found a single penetrating neck wound that led to the fatal outcome. There were no signs of physical violence or sexual assault. Already at this stage, the friend's version looked plausible but required additional verification. Investigators conducted interviews with the young people, 3 friends of the deceased and her boyfriend. Calming them proved to be a difficult task. All were in a state of deep shock and insisted on the absence of any provocations on their part toward the shooter. While detectives continued questioning and checking the young people's involvement in the tragedy, a patrol unit went to the place where, according to Blake Walsh, the shots were fired. The officers easily found the described building. But no one responded to knocks on the door. One officer walked around the building, shining a flashlight in the windows. He noticed some movement inside and heard sounds. His partner meanwhile examined the surrounding area with a flashlight. On the ground, he found tire tracks indicating the hasty departure of several vehicles. Law enforcement officers continued knocking on the door of the residence. They explained that they had heard gunshots and had come to clarify the situation. Several minutes passed before lights appeared in the dwelling. A man who identified himself as Kevin Monahan appeared at the threshold. At that time, he was 65 years old. He lived in Hebron with his wife. At first, Kevin categorically denied the fact of any young visitors. However, when the address was verified and confirmed, his testimony suddenly changed. Now the man told about how late at night a group of young people tried to attack him, arriving in his yard in several cars and on a motorcycle. According to his words, he was forced to take a shotgun and go outside to scare off the attackers, making a warning shot into the air. However, due to nervousness and insufficient visibility in the evening, he caught on a nail protruding from the porch and lost his balance. The weapon slipped from his hands and fired again. Kevin categorically stated that he was not aware of injuring anyone, as he had no such intentions. Upon receiving information about Kaylin's death from a shot to the neck, the man remained indifferent. However, he again emphasized the accidental nature of the event and the absence of malicious intent. The homeowner claimed that he and his wife were frightened by loud sounds at night. Looking through the window, they noticed a group of unknown young people who, in their view, were behaving aggressively. The strangers were making significant noise and actively revving their engines near their home. Given the late hour and the location of their dwelling in a remote, deserted area, the situation seemed threatening to them. Kevin's shotgun was taken for ballistic examination. Laboratory specialists established that it was this weapon that killed Kaylin. The bullets fired from the shotgun and retrieved from the victim's body had identical characteristic markings. These marks, which the barrel rifling creates on the projectile surface, are individual for each weapon specimen, similar to fingerprints. During official questioning at the sheriff's department, Kevin did not change his position regarding his innocence and lack of intent to kill. He again stated that the young people had attempted to attack his family and insisted that the second shot was not intentional, he was only trying to frighten the aggressors with a warning shot. The suspect explained that his shotgun was old, and he had repeatedly had difficulties with the mechanism during hunting. In his opinion, the weapon was defective, which caused the involuntary shot when falling. A detailed technical examination of the shotgun found no weapon defects capable of causing the tragic accident. However, it was also impossible to completely rule out such a possibility. By that time, law enforcement representatives had already notified Kaylin Gillis' relatives about the girl's death. All family members were stunned by the tragic turn of events and convinced that her death was not accidental. Investigators thoroughly studied the biographies of all participants in the case. It turned out that none of them had previously had conflicts with the law. The young people, including Kaylin and her boyfriend Blake, had never been prosecuted and were law-abiding citizens. The young man had only a few parking violation tickets. Everyone characterized the group as extraordinarily decent and educated people, focused on professional development, creating families, and lacking any tendency toward aggression. The very thought that they could have deliberately come to someone else's home at night to harass the owners seemed absurd to everyone who knew them. Suspect Kevin Monahan and his wife were also typical law-abiding Americans who in their declining years lived separately from their children. At that time, their offspring had already reached maturity and created their own families. Communication with the couple's children showed their sincere surprise at their parents' involvement in such a case. For many decades, Kevin had been the owner of a farm. Throughout all this time, the man had never once broken the law. Neighbors characterized him as a non-confrontational but somewhat sensitive person. The elderly couple lived in a very remote, isolated area where even the random appearance of a car could cause serious concern. The version looked credible, especially considering the nighttime of the event. However, not everyone was ready to believe it. Kevin remained unshakable, claiming that the loud sounds that woke him and his wife caused severe fright. His wife remained inside the house, and he, fulfilling his duty as head of the family and protector, armed himself to scare off unwanted guests. His wife fully supported Kevin's version, confirming every detail of his story. According to her, the noise near their home was too prolonged for accidentally lost vehicles, which would have immediately tried to leave. If they had really turned around instantly, Kevin wouldn't even have gone outside, but the prolonged threatening rumble of the motorcycle forced him to take the weapon. Kevin's wife recalled rumors about a motorcycle gang terrorizing their area. This led them to think that the gang had reached their home. When asked why they didn't call the police, Kevin couldn't give a clear answer. His wife explained that she considered this possibility but understood that patrol officers wouldn't be able to reach their remote location in time. After Kevin's return, they felt relief. The man didn't suspect he had injured the girl. Mrs. Monahan also wasn't a witness to the events outside, as she was in a distant room of the house and likewise didn't know about possible victims. The young people who accompanied Kaylin insisted that the entire incident lasted a maximum of a few minutes. They needed time to realize the mistake with the address, another attempt to contact the party organizers, turning around, and leaving. It later became known that they had missed the needed turn by just one. The celebration was taking place approximately 500 meters from the Monahans' property. The very next day, on Sunday, Kevin Monahan was charged with second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. The man continued to deny his guilt. The deceased's relatives insisted on the intentional nature of Kaylin's murder, not an accident. They believed the shooter acted consciously, but there was insufficient evidence for a first-degree murder charge. The prosecution sought to achieve exactly this qualification. According to investigators' conviction, the young people in cars and on a motorcycle posed no danger to the Monahan household residents. This was indisputable. One of the law enforcement officers during a press briefing confidently stated that the group consisted of children from extraordinarily decent families who couldn't be confused with a biker gang or criminals. Such conclusions were drawn after communicating not only with families and checking the criminal history of the young men and women but also after interviewing their neighbors, work supervisors, and educators. Without exception, all characterized them as exemplary citizens. Law enforcement also noted that in rural areas with dirt road surfaces, it's easy to mistake the route. The young people drove to Kevin's house only briefly, realized their mistake, and were already leaving when the homeowner suddenly appeared and fired 2 shots. After charges were filed, Kevin Monahan was placed in Warren County Jail to await trial hearings. Under the charges filed, he faced life imprisonment. After the press conference announcing the arrest of the 20-year-old girl's killer and the pending trial, the case gained significant public attention. The local community was deeply disturbed by Kevin Monahan's actions, but concern was caused not only by his behavior. One of the key reasons for growing anxiety in society was another murder. The community had not yet recovered from the tragedy that occurred just days before Kaylin Gillis' death. At the end of April, 16-year-old Ralph Yarl went to pick up his younger siblings from a babysitter. The events unfolded in the evening. The high school student was performing this task for the first time in an unfamiliar area, as his parents were delayed at work. Due to a mistake, he knocked on the door of the wrong house that had been described to him. In fact, the babysitter lived in the neighboring house. The homeowner, an 84-year-old man, opened fire without any warning. The homeowner shot Ralph twice. The young man also couldn't survive this attack. During questioning, the attacker also claimed he perceived the teenager as a thief, although in reality Ralph was a talented musician. He had excellent academic success and showed remarkable promise for the future. His appearance in no way resembled a criminal to provoke such suspicions. Ralph's death intensified the discussion about the right to own weapons and the limits of self-defense. The public was outraged by these events. It was particularly striking that Ralph's characteristics resembled Kaylin's. He too was an innocent young person who had nothing to do with crime, came from a respectable family, and was making plans for a professional future and family life. After studying all the details of the incident, investigators concluded, there was no real danger to the killers either in this situation or in the case with Kaylin's group. According to the prosecution's position, the attacks were provoked by groundless rage toward uninvited visitors who had simply lost their way. Undoubtedly, none of them deserved death. During the organized press conference, numerous relatives and friends of Kaylin spoke. Particularly emotional was the speech of her boyfriend Blake, who was next to her during the shooting. His eyes filled with tears as he read his statement. The deceased's aunt expressed outrage that Kevin Monahan had taken away her chance to become a grandmother, to watch her wonderful niece fulfill her ambitions. Kaylin's boyfriend shared the story of their meeting in 2021 when they were finishing high school together. Since then, the couple had been inseparable, their relationship lasting more than 4 years. Despite statistics showing that most high school romances end in breakup, Kaylin and Blake jokingly called themselves the 2% who after graduation create a family and live together their whole lives. The young man was making grand plans for a shared future with his beloved. The young man dreamed of starting a family with her. They planned to marry immediately after receiving their diplomas. In the television appearance, Blake stated that last Saturday, Mr. Monahan destroyed his universe. The young man declared his intention to be present at the hearing regarding the possible release of the criminal on bail. He was filled with internal tension and a desire to look into the eyes of the person who took his fiancée's life. Both he and the deceased's parents were convinced that justice would prevail and the killer would receive deserved punishment. Already on Wednesday at noon, 65-year-old Mr. Monahan appeared before the court. His defense attorney claimed that his client would not attempt to flee. Therefore, he could be placed under house arrest until the hearings began. The lawyer emphasized that his client had been the owner of the house near which the shooting occurred for more than 3 decades. He enjoyed respect in the community, everyone characterized him as a responsible person. Kevin Monahan ran his own small business. Despite all these arguments, the court decided to keep him in custody without the possibility of bail. The trial for murder and fabricating evidence was scheduled for May 11, 2024. Until this date, the man remained in prison. With the beginning of the hearings, the defense strategy became clear. The lawyer disagreed with the interpretation of events presented by the prosecution. According to his words, late at night at breakneck speed, 2 cars and a motorcycle with roaring engines invaded the man's private property, frightening him and his wife nearly to death. All this happened despite the fact that the lights in the house were off. It seemed strange that the young people didn't orient themselves from afar. In a house where a party of girls and boys is taking place, it would inevitably be noisy, lights would be on, and other vehicles would be parked. The Monahan couple had no idea who these people were or for what purpose they had appeared, so they simply got scared, perceiving them as criminals. The initial shot was made to frighten the unwanted visitors. However, in the darkness, the man didn't see a nail protruding from the floor, tripped over it, and dropped the shotgun. Since the trigger mechanism was damaged, when it hit the floor, the weapon fired again. Due to a fatal coincidence, the bullet hit Kaylin Gillis, causing a fatal injury. The defense attorney proved to be a convincing speaker. He claimed that when there are victims of tragedy, everyone seeks to find someone to blame, but that person doesn't always exist. The lawyer insisted that what happened was the result of a chain of accidents. The prosecution continued to assert that there was no threat to Kevin Monahan and his wife under any circumstances. Based on the tire prints that were thoroughly examined at the end of the man's driveway, the vehicles and motorcycle started on a straight trajectory. This indicated that they had already turned around and intended to leave. If events had unfolded as the accused described, there would have been characteristic wheel spin marks that formed during sharp maneuvering. There were no reasons to believe that the young people who arrived even late at night posed a danger to the elderly couple. This especially applied to Kaylin Gillis. The assumption that the girl could have been involved in something illegal seemed absurd to everyone who knew her. The defense attorney believed that the young people, due to certain circumstances, lingered near the house, which additionally frightened the elderly couple and forced the man to react under the influence of fear. In his closing argument, the district attorney addressed the jury with a statement that the killer was driven by anger. He only sought to get rid of uninvited visitors without trying to understand the situation. He didn't care at all whether he would injure someone or even cause death. At the very least, he demonstrated criminal negligence. This was also evidenced by the defendant's complete lack of remorse. Kevin, on the recommendation of his defense attorney, refrained from testifying in his own defense. This was too dangerous a step, especially for a person so removed from the legal system. The jury needed less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. Kevin Monahan was found guilty of second-degree murder, reckless endangerment, and tampering with physical evidence. The judge sentenced the killer to 25 years in prison for murder, as well as 4 years for tampering with physical evidence and recklessly endangering people. The judge emphasized that the man deserved to remain in prison for the maximum possible term provided by law. During the sentencing, Giles' friends and relatives were present in the courtroom. They felt satisfaction with the decision made and wept, embracing each other. Kaylin's father expressed hope that the criminal would end his days behind bars without ever experiencing freedom. The man's defense attorney, in turn, announced his intention to seek a reduced sentence and a retrial. When Kevin Monahan was led from the courtroom, Kaylin's family burst into applause. Shouts of "Coward" followed him. The senator and other political figures of New York State after the conclusion of the hearings expressed condemnation of gun violence. Once again, This case raised critically important questions about legislation on the use and carrying of firearms. Kaylin's friends and relatives organized a fundraiser on the GoFundMe platform to cover funeral expenses. At the time of sentencing, the campaign had raised just over $103,000. Currently, Kevin Monahan is in Warren County Jail. His wife, together with the lawyer, continues to fight for a review of the decision, being convinced of bias toward the man due to public resonance associated not only with Kaylin's death but also with the murder of young Ralph Yarl. On February 14, 2024, his killer Andrew Lester pleaded guilty to second-degree assault. However, while awaiting sentencing on February 19, 2025, the 84-year-old man passed away from natural causes. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.